At one point, Jovenel Moise offered a glimmer of hope for Haiti at a time of numerous crises. A former businessman who wanted to lift people out of poverty in the poorest country in the Americas.
Political stability is the first public resource. In no country on earth is it possible to talk about development unless there is political stability, unless there is social peace.
But his years in office were challenging, and he faced allegations of money laundering and corruption. Moise became president of Haiti in 2017 after being chosen by the former leader Michel Martelly to become his successor of the center-right Haitian Party. 2015's election was the first to declare him winner, but the vote was overturned after allegations of fraud and violent street protests. The rerun was then delayed by Hurricane Matthew, which caused widespread destruction in the south. But when it was finally held in 2018, it sparked disagreements about when Moise's term would end. After legislative elections were delayed that year, Moise stayed on to rule by decree without a parliament. He tried to reassure Haitians, even as things deteriorated around him.
Violence does not work with development and democracy. We have to cut bridges with these old practices that are putting the country behind.
Despite his calls for calm, the protests against him and his government got worse. He was accused of inaction in the face of increasing violence, a surge in kidnappings for ransom, and the growth of armed gangs. In March, he declared some forms of protest as acts of terrorism. Days before his assassination, Moise announced a new prime minister to tackle criminal violence, what would have been his 7th in 4 years. Not long after, a group of individuals broke into his home in the capital Port-au-Prince and shot him dead. Jovenel Moise was 53 years old.
Well, let's cross live now to Andy Gallacher. He joins us from Miami. Andy, what more do we know about this assassination this hour?
Well, there are calls coming from around the world from international leaders calling for calm in Haiti and showing their support for the people of Haiti. But essentially what we have here is a situation where a group of armed men broke into the president's private house on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince, shot and killed Jovenel Moise and injured his wife, the First Lady, who is now in hospital recovering. There are some reports suggesting these men were speaking Spanish and dressed as DEA agents who are from the US. That is clearly not a DEA operation. But the question now is, how does Haiti cope with all this? Because already the Dominican Republic has reportedly closed the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic over concerns of security. And this is, of course, a nation that is fragile at best, at the best of times. What we have here is an argument over the Constitution. Constitutionalists in Haiti saying that Jovenel Moise should have stepped down about a year ago. He's been ruling by decree. Elections haven't been held in some time. When they are held, there are often allegations of fraud and corruption. So the question now is for the people of Haiti, 60% of whom survive on less than $2 a day, what will happen next? Because situations in Haiti, as I've seen many times in the past, can spiral very, very quickly. Indeed, I think most people will not be overly concerned that their president is dead, but more concerned about what this will mean to them and the security of their nation. So this is an extremely volatile situation, one that could really easily go sideways, if you like. The Deputy Prime Minister saying that the police are in control of the country, but that is just the voice of one official. The reality in a country like Haiti is things could turn violent and very dangerous very quickly. We've already had gangs on the streets over the past year. Critics saying those gangs were working for Jovenel Moise. That has not been confirmed, but certainly I think there's a great deal of concern across the world about the situation in Haiti now that President Jovenel Moise has been assassinated.
Andy, it must be I imagine there must be a great deal of concern where you are in Miami, because there is quite a large Haitian community there.
Yeah, there's about 300,000 Haitians call South Florida home. There's a large community here. I would imagine many of the people living here have family back home in Haiti. So I think there will be deep concerns, again, not over the assassination, but over the safety of people in Haiti, because this is a situation, as we've seen before. Remember, democracy in Haiti is only about 35 years old. We had the Duvaliers, Papa Doc and Baby Doc ruling for years. They had the Tonton Macoute, the secret police that killed tens of thousands of people. So in essence, the democracy has been growing there, has been maturing, but it's still very fragile. So I think the security situation, certainly for people living here in little Haiti in Miami, they will be extremely concerned about what's happening with their family members back in Haiti. And remember, the United Nations had a large force there up until 2017. They have now largely pulled out of Haiti, leaving the nation exposed, if you like. But that was a popular move at the time. Certainly when I was there, people wanted those troops gone. There were talk about forming their own Haitian army. That there hasn't been one for decades. So it is really a delicate, precarious situation for Haitians who are already living in, if not the poorest country in the world, certainly the poorest other than sub-Saharan Africa. So a very delicate, very fragile and potentially very dangerous situation.
OK, Andy Gallacher there bringing us the very latest from Miami. Andy, thank you very much indeed. Let's stay with this. We can speak now with Kim Ives, journalist and editor with the newspaper Haiti Liberté. He joins us live by Skype from New York. It's good to have you with us. We were hearing from our correspondent about what a fragile situation Haiti is already in. What impact do you think the assassination of President Jovenel Moise is going to have on the country?
Well, all hell is going to break loose. I think right now the opposition has been pressing to make a transitional government, which I think the head of the UN office there, Helen Lalime, who is a longtime career State Department officer, has been somewhat sympathetic to and on the fence, from what my sources tell me. So I think now that Jovenel is gone and there's no clear successor, he just announced a new prime minister on Monday, Dr. Ariel Henry, who theoretically I would have thought would have been the one speaking, but instead it's the former interim prime minister, Claude Joseph, the former foreign minister that he was until his predecessor, Jout, resigned in April. So the circle around Jovenel was growing smaller and smaller. So I imagine now the U.S., which holds a predominant weight in Haiti, will try to bring about some kind of transitional government. The streets, though, are going to be very hot. There are armed neighborhood organizations formed in an organization called the Revolutionary Forces of the G9 Family and Allies, which have called for a revolution against the system in Haiti. And by that, they mean the entire system, including all the power that the bourgeoisie of Haiti wields. And they want to see a change in the life of the Haitian people, who live, for the most part, in dire poverty and misery.
Well, talk to us about that. We understand the situation in Haiti, very hot, as you say. Talk to us about these armed gangs, because our understanding is it was an armed group that assassinated the president. We don't know at this stage who they are. But you have written on the gangs in Haiti. Just give our international viewers a bit of context here. I mean, how big an issue are these armed gangs? I mean, who is actually in charge of the country as it stands? Right.
Well, what we do know is that the gangs and the killing of Jovenel appear not to be connected. It was apparently foreigners, very well funded. They had 9 new Nissan Patrol pickup trucks. They knew the layout of the president's house. They had inside information clearly. So this was a well-funded operation, probably backed by some country or a very large mafia of some sort. Now, the situation of the gangs, as they're called in Haiti, this has become sort of a grab bag, because there are different forms of organization in Haiti's booming lumpen proletariat, which Haiti 50 years ago was a largely agricultural society, but through neoliberal reforms, which drove peasants off the land and into the cities, Port-au-Prince has swelled from 500,000 to over 3 million people. And most of these people live in vast shanty towns. They have no employment, and they are trying to eke out a living. And in this context, the authority of the state has diminished, and local leaders have emerged. And some of them have turned to kidnapping and various other crime, but primarily kidnapping, to not only keep their neighborhood afloat, but, you know, give some of their neighbors and so forth money for a wedding or a funeral or what have you.
Okay.
Against them.
So I'm sorry, you're outlining the situation, which sounds incredibly delicate in Haiti, particularly for the people who live there. But I want to turn to something that you said earlier in that answer. You said that this was a well-funded group with their pickup trucks and so on, possibly financed by an external agent, a foreign country. Who might that be? I mean, given the state of Haiti right now, it has challenges economically, challenges politically. What benefit would there be for another country to overthrow the leadership?
Very hard to know. It may have been from within the Haitian bourgeoisie, some of whose members are very wealthy and possibly could have bankrolled an operation of this size and sophistication.
But why would they want to get rid of the president, I guess is my question.
Well, Jovenel Moise was at odds with many parts of the bourgeoisie, with members of the bourgeoisie who had sweetheart deals in some cases, which he was trying to cut back on. We have to remember that Haiti had a thing called the Petro-Caribe Fund, money from the sale of Venezuelan oil, cheap Venezuelan oil, from 2008 to 2018. That was cut off due to Trump's sanctions, President Donald Trump's sanctions against Venezuela. Venezuela could no longer provide the oil, and suddenly the money stopped for Haiti. So Jovenel had to go to members of this bourgeoisie who previously had supported him and say, listen, guys, you got to cut me some slack and give me back some of the money and deals that I'd given you before, and his predecessor had given as well, Michel Martelly. And these guys in the bourgeoisie got very, very mad, and they said, no way. And they were, in many ways, funding the opposition. So it became, and really commanded the central organizations of the opposition. And so there was a war between Jovenel Moise and some members of the Haitian bourgeoisie. Okay,
Kim Ives, I'm afraid we're out of time, but great to get your perspective. Thank you so much for joining us by Skype from New York. We appreciate it.
Thank you.